Africa. Kalle udu sihai. Samayado ipatla sabo pino. Welcome to the Medupi Corporation Retirement Savings and Ethiopian Crisis episode of Ubuntunomics podcast. This week, we look at the explosion at Medupi Unit 4, SA Kenya JCC, access to retirement savings and the DTIC opening applications for recovery support, and Tanzania's signing of the AMA Treaty, worsening conflict in Tigray, WHO helping Guinea with the Marburg Virus, and the sixth assessment report of the IPCC. With me is Sbu Nyati from Isakombe Assets. Hello Sbu, how are you doing this week?
Hi, Sia. I'm well, thank you, man. How are things that side?
I'm very well, thank you. And this week I'm joining you from the Eastern Cape as opposed to the usual Pretoria. And with us this week is Zama from M&M Legal. Hello Zama, how are you this week?
Hi there, Sia. Hi there, Spoo. I'm well, thanks. How you doing?
We're very well, thank you.
Awesome.
And let's get started with the stories this week. Our first story on the SA update is an explosion at Medupi's Unit 4. Eskom's Medupi Power Station experienced an explosion on the Unit 4 generator at approximately 10:50 on Sunday evening on the 8th of August. The incident occurred during the displacement of hydrogen with carbon dioxide and air to find an external leak. And there appears that the air was introduced into the generator at a point when the hydrogen was still present in sufficient quantities to create an explosive mixture, which ignited and resulted in the explosion. This occurs literally a week after the final unit 1 of the total 6 generating units attained commercial operational status, which is a crucial final milestone in the 4.7 gigawatt power station project, which commenced May 2007. And Eskom reported that the total capital cost of the project is currently sitting at 122 billion rand so far, against the initial estimated cost of 79 billion and the planned completion in 2012. So we're almost 9 years later and sitting at close to half of the initial cost in addition to the total cost. But there have been other independent calculations that put the cost at around 250 billion. Zama, you had a question around this story.
Yes. I mean, the question that I had is, with the explosion happening a week after the project was finalized, I'm stressing a week, I wonder if the units have really attained this commercial operation status, or was the project just rushed since it started in 2007?
You have a good question there. Look, I think we'll have to take their word for it. It's taken them this long to finalize. And it seems as though the last unit, yes, did reach commercial operational status. But there's nothing to be said about the other units which were completed earlier. You also might remember that the same Unit 4 has been giving Eskom problems in the past. And they've had to do unexpected maintenance in the past on the same unit, and also speaks to the various onlining stages of the various units, which also may have affected issues such as maintenance and the actual wear and tear of the units. So yes, I think we can accept that the last unit of Unit 1 coming online a week ago, but this also speaks to the delays and the fact that Unit 4 seemingly has been giving them a lot of problems and has taken on significant wear and tear as a result of this. Sbu, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's been criticism, and no, it doesn't matter how much the try to spin the thing, but one can't brush off the criticism that this was a legacy project, because currently this is the most expensive coal power plant in the world. And when they started, they rushed into it. I mean, the conceptual and the planning stages were rushed. The country needed to build something because we had all of those blackouts. So it's as if they wanted to prove a point, like they could do it like way back in the old days, in the apartheid days. They could build this big power station. There was always bound to be a massive cost overruns, as you were saying. The thing cost about 122 billion now. If you take into account that the size of the boilers and the pertinent works that that have to do with the design, because they were designing this thing on the go. There wasn't a final design before they started working. So this presents a nightmare for cost engineers, because they have to cost these things on a provisional amount basis. And in most cases, when you do that, the actual cost usually doubles. So, and there is still pending finalization of arbitration cases to decide on who is accountable, who is ultimately accountable, because the boiler subcontractors came back to Eskom to say to them, no, Eskom, we see that you've got this design, so we propose to have tube mills that are different. We have vertical tube mills. There was all this technical stuff. And so Eskom agreed to a change in design because the subcontractors said there would be cost recovery. There would be a saving on the job. So there's just a lot that's going on there. Because another thing that they don't tell us is that Eskom is supposed to put in scrubbers. Scrubbers are these things that take out the dirt. They call flue gas desulfurization plants that Eskom agreed with the World Bank that since this was coal and the World Bank was no longer financing dirty energy projects, they said, we'll put in this stuff so that it cleans it cleans the air, so there won't be as much pollution. And this stuff will only be done by 2030. So they can say now that the project is finished, but the project is not done as yet. They have not even started these scrubbers, and they are said to cost in the region of 120 billion extra. So it's a lot of spin. Anyway, yeah.
Actually brings us back to Zama's original question. I guess we'll have to just keep an eye on this story and see how things develop. Moving on to our next story this week, SA Kenya's Joint Commission for Cooperation, JCC. So the Minister of International Relations and Cooperations, Dr. Naledi Pandor, participated in the inaugural South Africa-Kenya Joint Commission for Cooperation, JCC, which took place in Nairobi on the 10th and 11th of August. The JCC will seek to strengthen the cooperation between the two countries and provide a platform to explore strengthening economic ties. While in Nairobi, Minister Pandor delivered an invitation to President Uhuru Kenyatta from President Cyril Ramaphosa for a state visit to South Africa at the end of 2021. The JCC provides an opportunity to finalize negotiation of agreements at a high level for signature during the much-anticipated incoming state visit of President Kenyatta. Zama, you had a view on this story. What do you think of this one?
I think, Sia, this story is really exciting. I think I love the idea of just any two African countries strengthening, integration and cooperation. But I guess my question comes, from a place of wondering what underlies this now effort to strengthen the ties between Kenya and South Africa specifically. Do you have any ideas around that?
Yeah, I think Smoo has a bit of background on this. Smoo, can you give us what are the underlying or existing ties between the two countries?
Well, what I find odd is that Kenya and South Africa, as things stand, do not have a trade agreement. They are only trading under the most favored nation, World Trade Organization rules. So this partly explains the reason why Kenya has a big trade deficit with South Africa, which is to South Africa's favor. You must bear in mind that South Africa is Kenya's second biggest trade partner in Africa, slightly behind neighbors Uganda. And now data for 2019 shows that imports from South Africa grew by 8%. So they're importing more and that their total imports from South Africa stood at $688 million, while Kenya exported to South Africa a measly $32 million. So that is less than 5% of what we export to them. So in all honesty, this is what I call economic surrogacy. It is extremely unfair. I also want to hear your thoughts about the lack of industrial and manufacturing capacity in most African countries here, because this leaves them exposed for the taking, because they still need all of these manufactured goods, all of these consumer goods, and they can't produce them.
Okay, so I think firstly, let me correct a comment you made there about them trading under the most favored nation rules of the WTO. I think so the point of the MFN rules is to provide an equal footing for non-parties to these bilateral agreements. And really the idea is that if, for example, South Africa and Kenya were to sign a bilateral trade agreement or a preferential trade agreement, the idea is that the rules would have to apply to other third non-parties. And the idea is that whatever kind of trade arrangement that South Africa has with a third party, let's say for argument's sake Uganda, would have to also be on similar rules. So the most favored nation rule applies those rules then to Uganda, such that there wouldn't be a clear discrimination between Uganda as well as the bilateral trade agreement between Kenya and South Africa. Where, for example, the WTO rules make a difference, though, is on the actual trade line items that the countries would liberalize with one another. The idea is that countries can pick any combination of goods if they were, for example, to establish a free trade agreement with one another to lead up to the 85% liberalization. And here the idea is that whatever kind of liberalization that countries introduce with one another is generally a sort of public good or a universal good for trade. The reverse, though, where, for example, countries hike tariffs on specific goods which they're trying to protect in their individual economies, is where the most favored nation rule would apply. So I just wanted to clarify some of those technical dynamics of the trade area agreement. So I think the other side of the story is that the difficulty in these countries signing and actually having a bilateral trade agreement is because of South Africa being a key major player in the Southern African Customs Union. Remember, the Customs Union is an agreement between South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, Namibia, and Eswatini to say that amongst themselves, they won't charge any tariffs on goods that they're exporting to one another. However, they will charge a tariff on goods from outside countries that are imported into the customs union. So as a result, South Africa cannot simply just have bilateral preferential trade agreements with countries like Kenya, because those agreements would also have an impact on the customs union itself. And as a result, South Africa's sort of trade relations have been generally driven by the regional economic community arrangements, such as the SADC Free Trade Area Agreement, such as the SACU Customs Union, in its relations with other parties. And they generally prefer making preferential trade agreements with large blocs or major trading partners for the entire region. Here you're thinking countries like China or regions like the European Union in terms of the Economic Partnership Agreements, the EPAs. And to answer your question about the low levels of manufacturing capacity, it's a complex question, I must admit, and some of it depends on or is hinged upon the historical past dependency of African countries' dependence on commodity exports. Obviously, South Africa being one key mining commodity exporter, although we do have some manufacturing exports in the likes of our automotives and other manufactured goods. Then, in addition to this, is the competition, obviously, that we face as African countries in terms of the cheaper goods produced from Southeast Asia, or even perhaps so-called higher quality goods produced from the traditional trading partners in North America as well as Europe. So this makes it quite difficult for South African or even African firms generally to compete with these multinational trading partners who are either cheaper or actually present goods that are either much better marketed or so-called higher quality goods from these traditional trading markets. And hence there's been this drive, which I greatly support, and Ubuntunomics is definitely all for it, intra-Africa trade. The idea is that although our competition with other parties in the rest of the world may be at our disadvantage, meaning African countries have got this so-called comparative advantage in commodity exports, right? Which are typically goods that have high elasticity of demand, meaning when the price of commodities changes or increases, the quantity demanded by our partners in the rest of the globe decreases, in comparison to manufactured goods from the rest of the world, which have a low elasticity of demand, meaning, for example, a price of a car increases by 10%, you still need a car. You have very little substitutes that you can, demand more of. And so as a result of this export profile, we're stuck in this trajectory of exporting raw mineral commodities. But the idea is that if we trade more with one another, we are at a more equal or equitable, competing stage. Hence, we can push for agendas that are beneficial for us, such as the beneficiation of these commodities, and promote regional industrialization in order to increase our industrial and manufacturing capacity. And that's a whole lot to say. This is a really complex thing, but the story is very positive, at least with regards to increased intra-Africa trade.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to our next story this week on access to retirement savings. The National Treasury of South Africa is considering to allow limited pre-retirement withdrawals from retirement funds under certain conditions. Government has been engaging with trade unions, retirement funds, regulators, and other stakeholders to discuss how to increase savings and improve preservation while allowing limited withdrawals without creating liquidity and investment risks. Early access to retirement funds will require legislative and fund rule amendments because the current law and policy prohibits any pre-retirement access to savings unless an employee resigns or is retrenched. This is expected to only be possible in 2022 and will exclude the Government Employee Pension Fund, GEPF, which is not regulated under the Pension Funds Act. Treasury has advised workers not to access their retirement savings before the amendment of these laws has been enacted to allow the pre-retirement access to savings. Zama, what is your view on this one?
I think that an amendment to retirement savings legislation would definitely be welcomed, and I think it would be positive, and I think it would help increase savings. Personally, from my side, I've wanted to take out a retirement annuity, for a while, and I think many other people have. But when I speak to a few people, there's complaints about the legislation. So particularly from the perspective that only a third of your investment would be given to you as a lump sum, and the rest would be kept in the investment. So not even looking at the early withdrawal option, which for me I think would just be an amazing amendment on its own. But if we could work around these, allow for early withdrawals, other aspects such as even considering more than giving just a third of the lump sum, then I think we would see more investment in retirement savings. I genuinely believe that the legislation should be amended.
Sure. So you're saying a more flexible approach in the legislation, which allows people to extract some of their retirement savings early, would actually spur people to save more.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Sbu, what are your thoughts on this one?
No, my thoughts are, I think it's a bad idea. I'm sorry, Zamai. That's in my book. It's just a bad idea because
I'm here for it. Let's hear it.
Okay. I mean, it won't be, for starters, it won't be difficult to get around the liquidity hurdle because insurers can issue out credit to allow drawings in tranches, so they don't face a liquidity hurdle, because what they would do is that according to their cash flow projections, they would issue out whatever drawings people want. So that's not a thing, a train smash. But however, we say as South Africa, we want to help increase the culture of savings. As it is, South Africa is known for its enslaving consumer credit practice, which is why they brought in the Consumer Credit Act, which sought to regulate consumer access to debt. This, however, has not helped South Africa because households are still relatively highly indebted at something like 77%. That is household debt compared to disposable income. So also, as a percentage of nominal GDP, our household debt stands at 47.6% of the gross domestic produce. Those are 2020 December statistics. So this increased from 44% pre-COVID, and when we had all of those layoffs and companies closing, it shot up to 47%. The highest we ever reached was 54.2% back in 2007. That was 2 years after the introduction of the legislation, because we're highly indebted. Now, South Africa also, we must bear in mind that it is 60% of our economic activity is based on consumer debt. It's on consumer activity. Consumers have to buy goods and services. So I don't see how this will help. If you getting people to buy more, to get more indebted.
I think the long and short is, and the way I see to balance your guys' different views is, we're just overly indebted currently for any flexibility to encourage further savings. The idea is that people are over indebted, and if they could access these savings, they will, even if it's not necessarily going to improve their livings or even their incomes. But just a last comment on my side, the way government is actually thinking about this is they want to amend the legislation to increase the required amount in terms of retirement savings by 1 or 2%. And then use that additional 1 or 2% as a buffer that people will be able to access pre-retirement. And so by so doing, they will be encouraging further savings, but creating a buffer that people can access. And I think on that point, that brings us to our last story from the SA update. The DTIC opens up applications for recovery support. The Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, DTIC, has opened applications for economic recovery support interventions announced by Minister Ibrahim Patel. The DTIC has earmarked 3.75 billion for the restoration of businesses which were adversely affected by the riots and looting that took place in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng a month ago in July 2021. This package will provide interest-free and concessional industrial loans towards rebuilding infrastructure, equipment, fitting of premises, stock, and working capital. The DTIC will provide 2 billion rand. The Industrial Development Corporation, IDC, will provide 1.5 billion, and the National Empowerment Fund, NEF, will provide 250 million rand. Zama, what are some of your views on this one?
Well, Sia, with this one, I guess it is encouraging. But I guess in the context of institutional lenders not really being open to assist businesses, particularly small, medium, micro enterprises. So I hope that the SMMEs, the businesses who I truly believe were hardest hit by the looting that happened in South Africa, and will be able to regain economic strength and recover through this program. So that is all I can hope for.
Sure. Spoo, any comments?
Yeah, this is good. This is actually very good. Yet, more can be done. The fact that these industrial loans will be interest-free has to be applauded as a step in the right direction. It changes our approach around development finance. It changes it away from the usurious high-interest loans, which always impede growth. How can we do better? I think we can do better by financing the balance sheets of these development finance institutions and changing their operating models away from being too commercial in orientation towards to being more developmental in philosophy. What good is it when you have all of these national resources competing with these national resources? I mean, these development finance institutions are our resources, but they are competing with commercial banks and trading under the same stringent lending models. So we saw, just recently we saw how the government loan guarantee scheme of 200 billion, it just failed. It bombed out because businesses were not attracted. There were no takers because the conditions, the interest rates charged were similar to those of banks. And so people just went straight back to the commercial banks instead of taking up this guarantee loan scheme that was provided for by the government, which only 10% ended up being taken. So business, we have to learn that projected earnings, that is profits, is what leads businesses to invest. That's why they take out debt so that they will make profits. Not just if you have lots of debt, lots of money available, and people will take that money and still not make profits. They will just not take it. So interest in the long term has to be something that is looked at seriously. So those are my views this year.
On that note, that brings an end to our essay update this week. That brings us to the Africa update for this week. Our first story in the Africa update this week is Tanzania signs the AMA treaty. The United Republic of Tanzania becomes the 22nd African Union member state to sign the treaty for the establishment of the African Medicines Agency, the AMA. The AMA treaty, which aims to provide support for the improvement of weak regulatory systems, was adopted by the heads of state and government during the 32nd ordinary session of the AU Assembly on 11 February 2019 in Addis Ababa. The AMA will be the second specialized health agency of the African Union after the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the Africa CDC. Zama, what are your questions on this one? You seem to have some concerns.
Yes, I do have a few concerns. I mean, given just the state of the health systems in Africa, and then looking at Tanzania, joining this treaty, I just wonder what the impact of this agency will be. I think it will be interesting to see what kind of impact it would have. I don't know, Sia, if for example, the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, how much work they're doing, and where the AMA will definitely also improve this impact. And then another thing that I'm wondering is what kind of support are we talking about when we refer to the support towards the improvement of weak regulatory systems?
So I think the Africa CDC, at least during this pandemic, has been at the forefront in terms of the access and distribution of COVID vaccines. And I'm not sure what or how big of a role they've played in the past with regards to other public health issues such as the Ebola crisis, etc. But in terms of the AMA, its function seems to be, in addition to sort of accessing external help or replicating some of the work that the global institutions such as the World Health Organization are doing at a continental level. So it seems to be more focused on some of the local production of medicines, but also ensuring that the quality of medications and also the regulatory frameworks that African countries adopt are enabling for us to ensure equitable access to medicines, but also high quality in terms of the quality of drugs and that are manufactured locally. So apart from other functions, the AMA is expected to coordinate and collaborate on a regular basis in terms of the inspection of drug manufacturing sites, including the regulatory oversight and safety monitoring of medical products as determined by the state parties and or the AMA, and provide reports to the state parties. The AMA will also promote cooperation, partnership, and recognition of regulatory decisions in support of regional structures and national medicine regulatory authorities that takes into account mobilization of financial and technical resources to ensure the sustainability of the AMA. So it seems to be more focused on the delivery of those medicines and the quality rather than the replication of sort of international best practice or access to medications on the continent. And on that note, it brings us to our next story in the Africa Update: worsening conflict in Tigray. The Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF) has reportedly killed more than 200 people, including more than 100 children, in attacks on displaced families sheltered at a health facility and a school in Afar region on Thursday last week. The recent spreading of the TPLF attacks in neighboring regions has displaced more than 300,000 people in Afar and Amara. As a result, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has called on capable Ethiopians who are of age to join the defense forces, special forces, and militia as a show of patriotism to fight the TPLF. Zama, you had a question on this and some concerns.
Yes, I'm very concerned. As we've noted, this is a worsening conflict. So this is really getting bad. This is bad. From the story, I like the fact that there's a call on young people to join the defense forces. Part of me believes, however, it may perpetuate violence, but I think it is a good step to get young people to grow patriotic to their countries and feel as though they're making a difference and actually, see firsthand what's going on. Because, obviously, we know Africa's the youngest continent. We've got the youngest population. So I think it is great that they're calling on, young people to join the defense force. But now, with that, do you think that the Ethiopian government should consider bringing in defense forces from other countries as well to mitigate the situation? Or do you think that is overreaching?
Interesting question. Especially given the involvement of foreign militias in terms of the Sahel conflicts on the continent, but also other more recent conflicts in terms of Mozambique and the involvement of Russian militias as well as the US. It's a difficult one. The US has obviously been playing a diplomatic role up until now, trying to pressure Ethiopian authorities to curb the attacks on the Tigray region. But the Ethiopian Prime Minister, as well as the Ethiopian government, has been adamant that these aren't attacks that are indiscriminately against the public, and that the government is not fighting Tigrayan people, but the actual TPLF. However, at this stage, Ethiopia has just been using its National Defense Force and Special Forces in terms of responding to this TPLF incursion. And obviously, there's been some involvement of neighboring militias such as the Eritrean military, which I'm not sure on which side they stand. I'm not sure whether that answers your question, but I would expect that sooner or later, the US will get involved, given that they also do have a base in Djibouti and in Kenya, which obviously part of their strategy in the Horn of Africa and East Africa region generally. We also would expect China to get involved there as well, but we'll have to watch and see as to how this conflict plays out and whether it seems as though it might escalate into a national conflict or some sort of civil war at this stage, but we'll have to watch and see. Smoo, your comments?
Yeah, I think President Abiy Ahmed underestimated the strength of the TPLF. Tigrayans are the same resilient group that fought and made its way down from the north towards Addis Ababa to depose the then communist Derg regime under Mengistu. And you will also remember those horrific pictures back in the mid-1980s of starving, emaciated children. This was mainly in the Tigray and the Amhara region. Then, after that, there was the almost decade-long civil war with which led to the secession of Eritrea. It was the same veterans which make up the TPLF that fought against the Eritreans. There was also a border war which followed right after that. I say again, the same Tigrayans bore the brunt of that war, and they were involved in the crossfire. This is what led to the resentment from Eritrea towards the TPLF. Hence, they joined on the side of the Ethiopian central government against the TPLF. Basically, the Tigrayans were the mainstay of the Ethiopian army. Hence, their overrepresentation in Ethiopian politics, even though they only make up 6% of the population. So those same TPLF generals have extensive experience in warfare, both in conventional warfare and in guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare during the Mengistu era and conventional warfare against the Eritreans. So my view is that this war can be more devastating than currently is, because these are agricultural communities that we're talking about, and since the war broke out, they can't plow their fields, so they can't bring in the harvest, and so 100,000 children are already feared to be facing malnutrition. So this is getting worse. Maybe the international community will come in, will step in, and if they step in, it might get ugly, because the Chinese would be on the side of the central government, Abiy Ahmed, and the US is on the side of the Tigrayans, the TPLF. Yeah, I should say that Sudan proposed to get in as a mediator, and they were rejected by the central government of Ethiopia.
Of course, given the fight that they're having on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, I don't see how that would have been acceptable. And it's also very concerning that it's almost been a sort of decade, I would say, of relative peace and calm in Ethiopia. And just as they were emerging out of the significant starvation and food crisis, they are now getting plunged into this sort of ethno-nationalist conflict. And it's a huge concern. And it seems as though the central government, the federal government of Ethiopia, is facing the war on multiple fronts, whether that be against Egypt and Sudan on the issue of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or even domestically now on the issue of the spreading Tigrayan conflict. We'll have to just watch and see. And just last week, we reported on 5.2 million people that are being displaced as a result of this conflict and who are also at a high risk of food insecurity. Very concerning. On that note, move on to the next story in the Africa Regional Update. The WHO helps Guinea with the Marburg virus. The World Health Organization, WHO, is supporting Guinea following its first confirmed death from the Marburg virus disease. Marburg virus is a highly infectious disease that causes hemorrhaging fever and is transmitted to humans by fruit bats. The virus is in the same family as Ebola, and it was detected in the Jikedu prefecture in the southwest of Guinea, near the borders with both Sierra Leone and Liberia, less than 2 months after the country declared an end to an Ebola outbreak which killed 12 people this year. The WHO is supporting the authorities in investigating the source of the outbreak, tracing contacts, and informing the local community about protection measures. Very concerning indeed, given the fact that we are still in the throes of the current COVID-19 pandemic and literally 2 months after the country had declared an end to the Ebola virus. Moving on to our next story in the Africa Regional Update, the 6th assessment report of the IPCC. The 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, was released this week. The IPCC is the international body set up in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, and the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, to provide policymakers with regular assessments of the scientific basis of climate change, its impact and future risks, and options for adaptation and mitigation. The report has found that mean temperatures and hot extremes have emerged above the natural variability relative to the 1850 to 1900 period in all land regions in Africa. Marine heat waves have become more frequent since the 20th century and are projected to increase across Africa. And relative sea levels have increased at a higher rate than the global mean sea levels around Africa over the last 3 decades, and will continue to increase in frequency and severity of the coastal floodings in low-lying areas to coastal erosion and along most sandy coasts. Zama, you had a comment on this one.
Yes, yeah. My comment is simply that all governments and citizens need to be warned. If they are not getting it yet, if it is not sinking in yet, this is the time. I believe that more initiatives must be launched. We covered the carbon tax incentive some time ago here on Ubuntunomics. So, this is in line with this problem. And I just believe that we need to come up with even more solutions. I don't think it's been taken seriously, and I think that people need to be warned.
Definitely. Smooth, you had one question on this one.
Yeah. When it comes to the seas, whenever you're talking about the seas, African seas, the seas around, the oceans around Africa, they're not well taken care of. So anyway, my question would be, do you think African leadership is up to the task? Are they aware? Is there enough awareness? Whatever there is it adequate? I mean, I don't have much faith in these people.
I Sadly, I must agree with you. My short answer to that is I don't think that our leadership is up to it. I don't think that we take environmental issues as seriously and significantly as we do, except, of course, in the case of drought. But drought obviously being linked to agricultural output and food security. But even that, we hardly take significantly, especially when it comes to establishing things like early warning systems, etc., which can easily help resolve issues of drought. Now, when you're talking rising sea levels, etc., which have very few solutions as simple as establishing early warnings, I don't think that our leadership is up to it, and I don't think that there are any significant ways in which African leaders are considering mitigating the impact of climate change. And that brings an end to our Africa update this week. This brings us to the numbers game. This week's number is 12.5%. So I'm going to give it up to you guys to guess what this number represents.
12.5%. Hey, this week I'm going to give it a skip. Swoop.
Yeah, wouldn't that be the food costs? I mean, food prices have been going up recently, so 12% sounds like a number,
A reasonable
a good number.
Close.
Yeah. Right on.
Close, but no cigar. So the number is 12.5%, and it's a 12.5% increase in manufacturing output. Manufacturing production in South Africa increased by 12.5% year on year in June 2021. The largest positive contributions were made by motor vehicles, which contributed 4.9%, metal products and machinery, which contributed 3.5%, and wood products and paper, which contributed 2.3%. The seasonally adjusted manufacturing production decreased, though, by 0.7% month on month in June. So we're seeing a bit of an uptick, at least on an annual basis, when it comes to manufacturing output, but still decreasing on a month-to-month basis. This is, of course, a month before we saw the violent protests and looting. So it'll be interesting to see what the July numbers will look like, given the devastation that has had on the country's productive capacity.
12.5% sounds good, though, yeah.
On a year-to-year basis, definitely. But remembering that in June 2020, we were in a severe lockdown context. I think we were in level 4, if not level 5. So again, we're talking about numbers coming from a low base. So for me, what is more closer is the month-to-month numbers. But nonetheless, it is a positive. We'll take the silver lining where there is. On that note, that brings an end to our episode this week.